Hi, and welcome back. In this lecture, we will cover another collaborative elicitation technique called brainstorming. Now, what exactly is brainstorming? Brainstorming is the act of generating ideas by one or more individuals to find a solution to a problem. Going through the definition, it's possible to further break it down into a couple of characteristics. One of them being generating ideas. This is actually one of the main strengths and uses of brainstorming. It's a technique that's focused on generating as many ideas as possible in a rather short time frame. There are no wrong or bad ideas in a brainstorming session. Bad ideas will be filtered out at a later stage. The definition also mentions by one or more individuals. You have to know that there are multiple types of brainstorming types. One of is conducting individual brainstorming sessions. So you pretty much generate ideas on your own. This can be useful to prepare a brainstorming session to spark people's creativity. Another type is group brainstormings, which can again be subdivided into two categories, being open group brainstorms and structured group brainstorms. The open brainstorms are open in the sense that everyone is just throwing in ideas in the group and someone is documenting those ideas as the group goes on. There is no real facilitation going on to direct the group's thinking. The opposite of open brainstorms are structured brainstorms. During these type of sessions, the facilitator will direct the brainstorming efforts in a structured format. Write down and group ideas together and ensure that everybody is being heard. This last part is quite important, as you can imagine that strong-willed people might intimidate others to share ideas. If you don't pay attention to that, you might end up with a one-sided set of ideas coming just from a few people. Next, the facilitator will also ask so-called what-if questions to keep the session going until all ideas are depleted. In essence, the facilitator provides hypothetical scenarios to keep the session going. Moving on now to when you should use a brainstorming session. Personally, I would use brainstorming sessions for the following reasons. The first one would be if I need to solve a problem that requires creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. And the second one would be if to gain more buy-in. So you can imagine that an idea that came from a group of people is usually more credible and has more weight than if it came from an individual person. What about the execution of a brainstorming session? As an example, I will go over the steps of organizing and facilitating a structured type brainstorming session over the course of 2 hours. You might have guessed it. First, we start with the preparation phase. The length of this phase can vary quite a bit. If you want to start to brainstorm from scratch, then the preparation phase can go quite quickly. You just need to clearly state the problem you are trying to solve. But be careful. When you do this, the level of ideas created reflects the preparation of your brainstorming session. If your participants don't get any information prior to the meeting, they will generate ideas which are limited by the knowledge they possess on the topic. If, however, you want to increase the quality of the ideas, you might want to research the topic more in depth and share your findings with the participants prior to the session. As a result, they will know more about the topic and come up with potentially better ideas. The saying of garbage in equals garbage out is quite applicable in this setting. So in summary, the preparation phase can vary from a few minutes to many days if you decide to do some research up front. So that was the question on the duration. Next, we also need to figure out who to invite. You have to make sure that the group is diverse enough, since it has been proven that diversity enriches the generation of ideas. Think here of the saying, to the man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Meaning that if you only invite people with the same background and skills, they will solve a problem with the tools they have. As a result, the solution becomes very unilateral and perhaps suboptimal. Then there is also the how many question. I would try to keep the amount of participants limited to, let's say, 8 or 10 people. Too many is not ideal, as some people might not feel the need to participate, and it's also more difficult to manage. Moving on now to the where question. I would advise to have a brainstorming session in a bright room away from people's usual workplace. You need to create an environment that allows creativity. Also, you don't want people to be disturbed by their day-to-day activities. Also, don't forget to foresee post-its, pens, whiteboards and available walls so that people can write down their ideas and put their post-its on. And finally, how long should a brainstorming session take? I believe that sessions of maximum 2 hours provide the best results. Sessions that take more than that tend to be counterproductive because people don't stay creative for that long and are just not motivated anymore. So it's better to organize multiple sessions of maximum 2 hours than just one big brainstorming session where you lock up people in a room for the whole day. So that was the preparation phase. Now we go into the introduction phase. This should take about 15 minutes. During this introduction phase, you introduce yourself and let everybody introduce themselves as well. After that, you proceed to the problem statement and summarize the main findings of your research if you did anything upfront. You also explain the structure of the brainstorming session and what will happen with the information afterwards. Be transparent. And finally, you should explain the rules of the brainstorming session. For instance, it's not allowed to break down ideas or interrupt people that are sharing their ideas. You can write the rules on the whiteboard so that everybody can see it at all time. I often like to start off with a brainstorming session icebreaker. That makes people more comfortable and more creative. You have to understand that people are often not participating in these type of sessions, so it's quite outside their comfort zone. People don't want to be judged when opening up and being creative. As an icebreaker, I prefer it to be quite practical and productive. So I ask people to already come up with not their best, but the worst ideas they can think of. It's quite a funny exercise as there is no shame involved, and it might surprise you that some ideas are actually quite good and can be used in the actual brainstorming session later on. This part should take around 10 minutes. Let's now go into the expansion part of the brainstorming. During this phase, you facilitate the brainstorming session and aim to have as many ideas as possible. I usually proceed as follows. First, I let everybody do an individual brainstorming session, meaning that everybody is writing down their ideas without discussing or sharing them. This is more efficient to generate more ideas quickly. I would say it takes around 10 to 15 minutes. Next, when I see that most people have stopped writing down, I open the group brainstorming session and let everybody share their ideas. During this part, it's not allowed to break down other people's ideas. You're only allowed to build upon the ideas that are shared. This part is about the co-creation, which is also one of the main strengths of brainstorming. While people are explaining their ideas, I already start to group ideas that go together and try to detect patterns or coherent solutions. This whole part takes about 30 minutes. Now is a good time to have a little break and let everybody stretch their legs. Having a break is very beneficial because your subconsciousness is still busy processing information and could come up with even better ideas when the break's over. I would say a 10-minute break should be more than sufficient. During the focus phase, it's time to find that specific idea that will help us solve our problem. The first thing I do during this focus phase is I ask everybody to discuss the ideas and argue why they're good or bad. So the goal is to have a list of pros and cons per idea. This should take around 20 minutes. Then I ask everybody to vote on the ideas that they like the most and should also be further refined. Typically people get 3 votes and the idea with the most votes wins. This should be about 15 minutes. Now that the group has identified the solution, you need to explain what's going to happen with that solution. This usually involves more desk research and refinement on your side. Be careful not to throw away other ideas as they might still hold some value. This phase should take around 10 minutes. And after that, I thank the people for their active participation. Now comes the aftercare phase. During this phase, I will document all the findings of the workshop in an Excel or a Word document so that I can share it with the group and any other relevant stakeholders that are interested in the results. Also, don't forget to tidy up the room and This should take around 30 minutes. That concludes the execution part. What are now the pros and cons of brainstorming? Some of the advantages are generating many ideas quickly detecting solution and capture consensus from the group. It involves multiple perspectives. Remember, the more diverse the participants, the richer the idea. If done correctly, it also promotes equal participation. There is also an element of co-creation. Participants are asked to enrich their colleagues' ideas. It promotes out-of-the-box and creative thinking. And the last pro that I can think about is that you get a strong buy-in from participants as the idea is essentially theirs. Remember, an idea coming from multiple people carries more weight compared to an idea generated from an individual. What are now some of the cons? During brainstorming sessions, ideas are often not explored in great detail. They are just identified and listed. Perhaps with a bit of more time and research, a good idea could even become a great idea. The preparation work can be quite lengthy, especially for structured brainstorms. There is also a strong dependence on the expertise in the room. As I mentioned before, garbage in equals garbage out. You have to be careful of biased solutions due to strong-willed people. Make sure that everybody gets a voice during the session. You have to also make sure that you create a safe environment. Inviting a participant's boss, for instance, might hinder the participant's creativity, as it might not want to come across foolish. It requires a strong dose of facilitation skills to run a structured group brainstorming session. And finally, it creates an environment where it is easy to judge people and be judged. As always, I will disclose some of the tips and tricks that help me during my brainstorming sessions. So first, determine the type of brainstorming meeting ahead of time. Publish an agenda prior to the brainstorming session to ensure that everybody is up to date. Clearly state the objective of the meeting and the problem statement. If people are solving the wrong problem, the brainstorming session pretty much becomes irrelevant. Create environments that encourage participation and creativity. When people explain their ideas, make sure that everybody gets their turn. Establish ground rules at the beginning of the meeting and write them down somewhere visible. Some examples of rules are do not discuss ideas during the brainstorming session or the expansion phase. Do not dismiss or discount an idea or a person. And do try to build on other people's suggestions, and most importantly, do have fun. Another best practice is to establish roles prior to the meeting. If you're lucky enough to receive help, the roles you want to define are a facilitator, a timekeeper to ensure that we do not go over the time-boxed agenda, and a scribe that collects the participants' ideas. This will drastically reduce the aftercare work. If you feel that you need more time, create multiple sessions with some time in between to keep motivation high. And finally, have a voting system in place to choose the final ideas that will be further analyzed. This is the most democratic way and it creates the most buy-in from everybody. Voila, you now have all the necessary knowledge to conduct a brainstorming session successfully. Let's move on now to the next technique. See you there. Bye.